A lot of research has happened in the past around coffee cherries, but no one's actually industrialized it, especially in Colombia, because no one's actually created a company the size that we've created. So they haven't had the resources or the manpower, the human capital, really to tackle some of these issues. So we're on the frontier of what to do with this byproduct.
Hi, this is Garrett Sutton, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavaggioni, and today's guest is Cole Shephard. So Cole, super excited to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cole, I would like to start this off the same way I start every podcast. And actually, before I even get to that, I want to let all my listeners know too, that this is a little bit different than some of the other topics we've discussed in the past. So I'm really excited to have Cole share what he does here today. So the first thing I want to do, Cole, is ask you if you could share a little bit about yourself, share your story, and tell us, who is Cole Shephard?
Sure. So I'm Cole Shephard. I live down here in Medellin, Colombia. I would say most of my time on the work side of the life is really dedicated to a company called Green Coffee Company, which I founded in 2017. It started off as what I would say is a small, consolidated, almost like a real estate asset management fund product. And we've since grown to the largest coffee producer in the country of Colombia. For any of the listeners who don't know, coffee is the national product of the country. So I sit on the board of that company. And then the other company that I'm heavily involved with is the company that I'm recording from today, called Polygonus, which is the digital arts and entertainment company. Part of it's an academy teaching people how to work in video game production and Netflix productions. And the other side is actually developing video games.
Awesome. Short, sweet, concise, but to the point.
There you go.
Cole, that's pretty awesome, man. Coffee, Colombia is known for coffee, right? As a matter of fact, as we're sitting here talking, I was just drinking my coffee. Now, I love my coffee out here in Hawaii because this is where I live, right? And I can get the local Hawaiian coffee pretty easily because it's right in my backyard. But when I still lived back on the mainland, Colombian coffee was always a staple, right? That's what everybody preferred. Everybody liked Colombian coffee. It's a rich, darker coffee, right? Very enjoyable. Yeah, I'd like to get into that a little bit. If we could talk about how you got into the coffee business and what brought you down to Colombia in the first place.
Sure. So I'll start at the beginning. I graduated from North Carolina State University when I was 23, went to undergrad in accounting and finance, did a master's in accounting and finance a year after that. I started with PwC right out of school, a couple years in Raleigh, North Carolina office, moved to Bermuda when I was 25. Started doing financial services, auditing of banks, insurance companies, asset managers, private equity. And then I moved with the same firm to Hong Kong. I was in between Hong Kong and Beijing, actually, before I moved to Colombia. And my background was in financial services and mergers and acquisitions. So when I moved down to Colombia, what I was looking at is potentially trying to run M&A teams with the firm that I was previously working for. And when I came down, I saw a world of opportunity of what I saw. And so when I came down, I started doing my own projects. I decided to quit the corporate life, put all my money into the bet on yourself basket, started doing real estate deals down in Colombia. And I still had a bunch of contacts in Asia. And I found that this trade corridor between Latin America and Asia is quite light. Not many people specialize in that, and got into trading commodities. So I ran my own little, I would say like a commodities trading book, primarily with fresh cut flowers. And for listeners who don't know, Colombia is the #2 exporter of fresh cut flowers in the world, behind the Netherlands. And I focus primarily on Asian markets, right? It's like South Korea was a big market for us, Japan, Southern China, Hong Kong, obviously. And when I got into that, we started looking at coffee, cacao, other commodity-based products. So we came across a group of real estate investors who wanted collateralized asset exposure, and they wanted an ag project, right? They wanted something that can compete with commercial real estate. And we basically, what we did is we created that investment product for them by starting this coffee company with the original business thesis of buy farms at scale, consolidate infrastructure, and then sell as far down the value chain as you can get. And so originally that was that, right? We were just basically competing with commercial real estate. And then as we got into the business, we say, man, if we really invest in this, we can really have something special. So about 2 years in the project, we really invested in international management teams, kicked up the capital raise to another notch, and started really acquiring new farms, acquiring technology, and most importantly is the human talent, right, behind what we do. In last year, we became the largest consolidated producer in the country. This year will be 2 or 3 times larger than our nearest competitor in the country, and it's only to the moon and up from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when did you start this business?
2017.
Wow.
So it's quite new, right? So it took us five years to go from a project in one's head into explaining it to initial round of almost, it's an early stage company, almost like you're building a blueprint, and to become the largest player in the country. So as of today, we've deployed $57 million only in equity into Colombia.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That is amazing, Cole.
Thank you.
I was expecting you to tell me, oh yeah, we started this back in 2005, and
wow,
man,
we're still fairly new to the game. A lot to learn, but we're a major player now. And also, for anyone who doesn't know, Colombia is the 3rd largest coffee producer in the world. So being the largest producer here, we get a lot of access into what's happening in the world in commodity markets, what's happening in coffee. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is that when you first started this off, you had investors approaching you, right? Looking to get into something else and diversify their portfolios. And you said, hey, let's structure something more around the commodities here, structure it like a real estate deal and raise the same way, which is what you did to start the coffee company, the green coffee company. That's right. So that's amazing. And to structure it that way, obviously, you were able to take the same principles that most real estate investors use to scale very quickly, because it's 2017 to now to being the largest coffee manufacturer in Colombia. That's amazing. I want to ask you a little bit then, like when it came to actually structuring how you put this together, like you said, you built this blueprint. What was like the beginnings like? Like how did that first when did investors start approaching you and say, hey, we want to get into something? And you said, I got this idea up here. What does the birth of this look like?
Sure. I would say the birth of it really is the desire. I think the desire from U.S. higher net worth individuals is the desire, right? It is the birth of it. The company was born out of a desire to move capital outside of the United States for interesting investment opportunities. So my background, besides M&A, was a lot within asset management, right? So our business was a lot with obviously high net worth individuals, but private equity funds, corporate buyouts, things like that. What I've seen in the course of my career is a lot of US accredited or high net worth individuals. They're looking for international opportunities. And most of them that say, and take everything away from like public markets, like public equities, public debt. On the alternative side, the private markets, they really only have access to real estate. Like most investors really have difficulty finding opportunities outside of real estate. And especially when you're thinking about 2017, 2018 time period when we're doing our initial cap raise, cap rates were quite low. So you're looking at, if you want to do a multifamily deal in Texas or Arkansas or Missouri or wherever during this time, maybe you're getting cap rates 5-6% of your money. So a lot of investors were looking internationally. So the group that approached us, they were already looking at Colombia and they were comfortable with the risk return profile of Colombia. So the reason why people like agriculture is because typically it can yield higher than what you would see in a commercial real estate market. Right. And if you can pull enough capital together, you can have something special. So in the US, if you're going to do a high level ag deal, like you really need to be working with, I'd recommend like 50 million and up, probably kind of capital stacks. Here in Colombia, price tags come down significantly. In the US, it's really institutional capital that's really playing there, but the yield will be higher than commercial real estate. And in markets like Colombia, where you can buy huge amounts of land for what would be a fraction of the price in the United States, yield profiles are really attractive. So I would say as much as the coffee industry was fragmented, and it still is fragmented in Colombia, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lack of, I would say, both human capital and that's a USD or peso capital flowing into the markets. It's the US high net worth individuals who are looking, I guess would be like the frontier, the pioneer investors who really drove a lot of what we did and have supported us ever since the beginning. We have a lot. As of this morning, I probably have, 430 investors, all high net worth US, almost all US based accredited investors. And a lot of them have invested with us almost every single round since the beginning.
Awesome. One of the things you had mentioned earlier, and now I'm starting to put it together in my head, is you said as you were growing, one of the biggest things you were focusing on was growing those international teams, buying farmland. And now I'm going back to you buying farmland piece when you just mentioned how you can get land, like large pieces of land in Colombia at a fraction of the cost. And now there's plenty of places in the US you can get land at a fraction of a cost. And it's usually like in the desert in Arizona. So when you mention land like that, are you purchasing really good, rich areas for farming to grow the coffee business?
Yeah, one thing you need to look at is there's a lot of global studies on where the most valuable agricultural land is in the world. And Colombia is right at the top of the list. Colombia has one of the biggest things about agricultural land, if you're going to do like outdoor grows, not like hydroponic grows or indoor grows, is you need access to water. And obviously climate is massively important, right? So in Colombia, you have everything from jungles to mountains to flat grazing area for cattle, but almost everything grows in Colombia. It's like almost like a tropical climate. So you get like a free pass on a lot of the agricultural goods. But if you were to compare it to US farmland, like I would expect 25-30% of the cost of US farmland with significantly better growing conditions for a lot of the crops. So when we go out and we acquire for, is this going to be good coffee land for the next 100 years? And is it productive? Is it not productive? Do we need to build it out? But yeah, we only buy the best of the best with agricultural land for sure.
Awesome. Now, I want to ask you about Legacy Group itself, right? It's not just the coffee piece, but what else is part of Legacy Group and what do you do besides coffee in Latin America?
Sure. So I started Legacy Group when I came down to Colombia. And the idea really was, the initial companies were set up in Hong Kong. And the idea around legacy was the word itself is one part legacy. People think of capital, right? Like leaving a legacy to your kids. Or legacy is what do people remember you for, right? So I named it Legacy Group because I only wanted to do projects and deals that I was proud of being a part of. And obviously they have to make money, but there's always going to be a capital aspect to it. So I like the play on words or the meaning behind the word legacy. So when I came down to Colombia, I started doing deals and businesses that I was excited about. And so originally it was real estate deals that I really liked and then getting into commodity trading.
Cole, I was going to say, because you were talking about when you first started, it wasn't like you just went down there and started in the coffee business. You went down there doing real estate, right? Doing the stuff you knew, right?
That's right. Yeah, real estate. And my background, like in Hong Kong, a lot of my deals were based around buying insurance companies, buying banks. So my knowledge of financial services would be more than the average guy. I knew financial services really well. I know how banks work. I know how global lending works. And when I came down to Colombia, I saw massive discrepancies in the availability of capital, especially related to debt. So when you see that, you see all these mismatches, there's always going to be arbitrage or areas that you can find interesting things in real estate, because real estate is primarily driven by access to capital, primarily debt, and that'll drive valuation bubbles or recessions or whatever. And what I saw is debt was very uneven, is very difficult to get, very low penetration rates. So I was trying to find anomalies in real estate and then also do businesses that I was excited about. I love the commodity and trade business, right? So things like fresh cut flowers that I thought was a real cool business. Anything in agriculture, I always thought was a really cool business, and focus on trade corridors that I thought were cool. Besides just coffee, the other big one that we do down here that I'm saying is with Polygonus, where I'm recording today. My favorite part of their business is the academy, right? So the academy was grown out of their core business, which is the production of video games. So this is a group of very talented artists and software engineers that their background is creating video games, of course. But what you're going to find in any, I guess, emerging market is an emerging talent pool is you need more talent, right? So they actually created an internal academy to create the talent internally in Colombia so they could have a recurring labor pool so they could actually make video games. What they found was the academy almost has more demand than the video games itself. If you take kids and millennials these days, they love playing video games. But if you could teach them how to work in video games and make that a real job, like they're all over it. So 2 years ago, they struck a deal with government here to start teaching kids how to work in video games. And so they're the only one of the only academies in Latin America that teach people how to really work all the way from, let's say, artistic concept art, all the way to making it 3D modeling, all the way to take it to Unreal Engine and make it into live video games. And so I'd say in the last few years, they've taught upwards of 2,000-3,000 kids how to work in the industry. And not hypothetical, like this would be how you would do it if you do this, like actual trade work is saying at the end of this, if you can get through these programs, you can work in the industry in a real job.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Giving them all the tools necessary to go out and start their career as soon as they graduate, as soon as they finish. And yeah, building a system like that so that you can keep that labor pool constantly filled it's the best way to do it, right?
Absolutely.
You're going to constantly have folks that, even if you're not hiring them and they're going out into the workplace separately, but you're going to constantly have that workforce there that you'll be able to fill your cup first before having to worry about where else they're going. So that's pretty awesome.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
So you're doing a lot more than just coffee, right? So that's pretty cool. And it's very diverse, right? So that's one of the things I really like about this too, is that you're not just in one specific industry, right? So you give your investors these different options that they can be diversified as well. They're not just stuck in one particular industry, which is great because there's a lot of real estate investors here, accredited investors too, that are looking to get into other things besides just multifamily or commercial real estate. And maybe they're looking outside, they're looking, how can I invest overseas? And get into some international investing in international companies. And this is a great way to do that. So speaking of, I'd like to ask you, like, what type of investment offerings does Legacy Group have for accredited investors and what problems do they solve?
Sure. So when we raise capital, for instance, we're finishing a $25 billion capital raise right now for the Green Coffee Company. We got, I think, $900,000 left. And we do 506Cs. Right? So $100,000 minimums. What we found over the course of the last 5 years of raising from accredited U.S. investors for green coffee is, one, they like to invest in Delaware companies. U.S. structures are best, even for international companies. All of our companies are structured out of Delaware, right? So we basically dual track all of our companies in a traditional international corporate structure so that either can be sold out in a corporate sellout or you could do an IPO track and list it on a public market. Right. So most real estate investors, you don't usually set up syndicated real estate to go public on a public market. Usually you exit at some kind of hopefully heightened asset value. But what we do is things like the coffee company could easily be structured as something like a fund where you're going to get some kind of asset valuation. But in reality, it operates as an international corporate. And so we want to get enterprise valuations with the ability for what I like to call just big boy exits. Right. So when we go into both capital raises and how we structure our business to take one step back, myself and my partner, we put huge amounts of our own capital into our businesses. And we don't like bifurcate our efforts into too many businesses at one time. Like we're not a traditional VC that'll take 20 portfolio companies on. We like to make really big concentrated bets with our own capital and make sure that we spend our time appropriately and make sure these opportunities work for our investors. So we only focus on like the two that I gave you are actually the only two that we work on. And until those two companies are successful, we likely won't take on more portfolio companies. But yes, I would say the key things that we try to solve, to go back to your question, Mike, really are heightened returns for investors, access to international, projects and companies outside of the scope that most accredited investors, especially U.S. investors, have access to. Something like Colombian coffee, a lot of our investors love because, one, they understand coffee, they love it. And two, a lot of our investors have never been introduced to a Latin American project of a real company, something that's, wow, this is actually a multinational corporate, and I can get in a private early stage before it hits public, and I'm paying heightened valuations where you're competing against the Canadian pension fund on valuations. So I'd say those are the big ones that we try to solve.
Yeah, that's awesome. Again, it's the options that are offered to your investors. So that's just fantastic. What about, so being a coffee company, right? Obviously, farmland's a big thing that you guys need, right? You have to grow the coffee beans. And there's always that picture of what is like the social or environmental impact that companies, larger corporations are doing. For you being a coffee company, for the coffee company side of it, and with the name Green Coffee Company, I'm thinking in my head that this
Yes.
is more of a green, quote unquote, company that is looking to help with just the environment itself. And that's what I want to ask you about. So what is it that you guys do, or your focus on producing that positive social and environmental impact?
Absolutely. And in coffee, to again, from a macro perspective, it's something I always tell our investors. If you're not doing things in this space, especially in the environmental space in coffee, you're not going to be around in 10 years because guys like our team are going to basically eat your lunch. The green coffee is actually, to take another step back on the name, the core product of a coffee company is called green coffee. Most people don't know that. The coffee that goes into a coffee roaster, it's green in color, and it's called green coffee.
Yes.
It's what it's
I've
actually traded.
I've actually watched the process get done at one of the coffee farms here
There you
in
go.
Hawaii. So yeah, I absolutely
The
love that. I think
Kona.
that's so cool.
Absolutely. And so when we were coming up with the name of the company, when we started, I loved it because we knew we were going to do sustainable farming from the start. And I love the name Green Coffee Company, one, because of its simplicity, and two, because if you're going to name yourself Green Coffee Company, you better be green, right? So like things, we have a whole ecosystem built around that theme, actually. And we're really in the coffee industry in Colombia. I would say we're probably the only ones that actually ring true to that theme. And I'll give you a few examples. So when we go into infrastructure development, for instance, we build everything from scratch and we build for the best, brightest machinery that you have anywhere in the world. So let's say water usage is a massive issue in commercial farming. So water usage on a typical, let's say a pound of green coffee, typically in Colombia, it's somewhere between 20 and 30 liters a pound. We can do it for less than 1 liter of water per pound. And so what that means is, in layman's terms, we're like 30 times better just with water usage than the average farmer. Other things that I would say are, as well as like the capitalism side, but as on the sustainability side, are things like the use of byproducts, right? So for viewers who don't know, coffee comes in a cherry. You know, what you're drinking when you drink Kona coffee, for instance, when Mike's drinking it in Hawaii, you're drinking the roasted seed. But over half of the weight of the cherry typically is like thrown in a river in most of the parts of the world. It ferments and it pollutes when people do that, right? Some people say they use it for fertilizer. The majority of it is wasted and it's pollution material. One of the things that we're doing is focusing a large part of our business on what do we do with byproduct. So one of the cool things that our investors in the US personally are ecstatic about is we're building an industrial scale distillery to make food grade ethanol, right? And so ethanol is a fancy word for moonshine that we can make our own line of spirits from, right? Vodkas, gins. In Colombia, the big alcohol is guardiente, which is like an anisette type liqueur. And so we'll be able to produce 12,000 liters of ethanol a day. Now, something like that works on the capitalism side and say, look, you can make profits and revenues out of something that's free, but on the other side, you're also reducing your levels of contaminants. I say lastly, the biggest thing in large scale ag farming in places like Latin America, or let's say Africa, this is another large coffee producing region, is full-time labor and actually paying real wages. I would say it's estimated probably in agriculture in Colombia, especially coffee farming, maybe 1% of employers actually pay pension, wages, health benefits. And so all of our full-time laborers, like they really receive pensions, they have vacation time, they have health insurance. And for most of the US listeners listening, you'd say, yeah, that's a standard. Everyone does that. 0 people do that actually in large scale agriculture in Colombia. It's massive rarity that people actually pay real-time wages because they just have seasonal workers who work for $10 a day. And after they don't need them anymore, don't show up. It's a very aggressive lifestyle, and building communities around the actual business is massively important for obviously retention, but actually being proud of the business that we're creating.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you're able to provide, you're doing job creation in the country, right? But you're not only job creation, but you're creating jobs that are sustainable for the people that live there.
That's
You're
correct.
paying them better wages. They're getting benefits where you normally wouldn't get that anywhere else. You would just show up, you get paid for the day, and you don't show up when you're not needed anymore.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure with the way that you guys are doing things, people show back up and they come back.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
All right, Cole, I have to ask you now. So if you guys are taking the byproduct, right, and you're able to create ethanol from it, you're able to create ethanol from the actual like bean shellings, the leftover pieces. How does that process, what does that process look like?
Sure. So if you were to take a coffee, it actually comes from the coffee cherry, the sugars in the coffee cherry. Okay. So I grew up in North Carolina. I know you can make moonshine from anything. You can make it from tree bark if you want to. So all you need is a sugar source, and you can make alcohol from that sugar source. So basically, you're just extracting out part of the membrane of the cherry, and you can create ethanol from that sugar source. But in reality, you have a byproduct of a byproduct. The byproduct of an ethanol process will be long-stream fiber and protein, right? And so that can be, you can actually create fiber extracts that can go into food additives, anything to make commercial food, basically. Or you can make antioxidant mixes, things like Korean beauty creams. They use a tremendous amount of antioxidants. Coffee cherries have more antioxidants than blueberries, actually. And everyone reads about blueberries having the most antioxidants out of anything. Coffee cherries have some of the highest in the world. And lastly,
I drink coffee every day.
There you go. You're going to live forever. Yeah. Yeah. Then you have protein as well. And so protein, I mean, like an easy byproduct for people to understand. After you soak out the sugars and you make ethanol, you have this long-stream fiber, antioxidants, and protein. You can have animal feed from that, right? And you basically have byproducts on byproducts. So part of what we do is you have an ecosystem of value and make sure you make the most of everything you have.
Sure. Yeah. So Cole, I wanted to ask you too, besides the ethanol, do you guys take any of the other byproduct like the fibers or anything and do anything with that as well?
Yes, actually, we're doing research right now on what is the best use case for that. We've used it for, you probably have seen things called cascara tea, which Starbucks have done in the past. There's a couple small, I would say like RTD kind of drinks that are doing cascara teas. We've done some experiments with that. We sold some coffee, cherries like that. A lot of it some of it will go to animal food in the future. We have some potential contracts lined up for that, but some of it is actually in the research and development phase. A lot of research has happened in the past around coffee cherries, but no one's actually industrialized it, especially in Colombia, because no one's actually created a company the size that we've created. So they haven't had the resources or the manpower, or the human capital really to tackle some of these issues. So we're on the frontier of what to do with this byproduct as we speak. So this ethanol is actually one of the largest investments into the byproduct usage case of any product ever used out of Colombian coffee cherries in the history of Colombian coffee.
Yeah, that's amazing. You guys really take that name green seriously. And I can say I really appreciate that, because if more bigger companies started doing something like that and just really paid attention to their impact, it can make a big difference just in the world in general. You guys, you're crushing it. Cole, thank you so much, man. This has been fantastic. Now, what I'd like to do is transition this into something that I call the final round. Mm-hmm. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. And it gives us a better idea of how you are under pressure and what your decision-making looks like, which I'm pretty sure we already know. You're going to kill this game. Look what you did from 2017 to now. Yes. So I'm pretty excited about this. So if you're ready to go, we'll get this party started.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Right. Let's do it. So Cole, first question is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in business?
Sure. I would use it almost as a relative example, is waiting too long to make what you know is the right decision, even if it's aggressive. So letting a business or maybe an employee or someone that you like stay on when you say, look, this really isn't the right choice. Maybe it's going to improve in the future. And in your gut, it's not going to. You need to make hard decisions immediately. And so that's one of the biggest things I probably learned after running my own businesses the last decade, is even if you have a tough decision and you know it's the right thing, to don't delay it. Do it immediately.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Actually, the next question kind of ties into that, and you touched on it. So maybe we'll go into something else here.
Sure.
But what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first got started?
Sure. I would say when I started in business, I was going into the CPA world, the financial services world. I thought what mattered was the ability to have CFA exams or CPA exams, all these MBA credentials, master's of credentials. what matters the most is experience, right? Make mistakes, learn something, especially if you're going to be in the entrepreneur route. The more mistakes you can make and the faster you make them, the better. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to make everything great. When I look at candidates that are coming to work with us, I honestly don't care if guys are MBAs or have CFAs or have JDs or whatever. I want to see what they've done in the past and if they can accomplish the goals we have laid out for them. So all the, I guess all the acronyms beside your name mean less to me than they ever did before.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. I wish more people thought like that, but I wrote
Yes.
that down, how experience matters more than education. And that is so
Yes.
true. Even in the real world, it's what, especially for real estate investors, right? A lot of
Definitely.
times their experience has become their education, right? Those mistakes that they
Definitely.
made become very expensive and almost the same cost of an MBA.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you
Absolutely.
100%, Mike.
You're going to get your education
100%.
either way. It's either going to be through experience
Yeah.
or education.
And you're going to pay for it either way.
Yeah, absolutely.
know?
All right, Cole, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started out today? Let's say somebody just got themselves completely out of debt and they want to start investing. What kind of tips or tricks would you recommend to somebody who's pretty green?
Sure. The first thing is I would set aside a pool of capital, one that you're comfortable losing, right? One is say, okay, this is my learning capital, and invest in some projects that you can go and learn amongst, right? So you'll never be the best investor in the world on your first run, especially if you're issuing that, say you're buying equities in private markets or something that, is outside of your complete control, complete foresight. But the most important thing to me is to get started and start learning, right? Especially if you're young, you have time to learn. Put a little capital aside. Don't make gigantic bets. Don't bet it all in one place, but bet on things and invest in companies and entrepreneurs that you think can be successful and try to learn from them. And right, especially in private markets, in real estate, especially, you'll have sponsors all over the place. You'll have assets that are all over the place. There's tons of assets out there, but there's very few sponsors, I would say, that are really excellent, like really excellent. And those are the guys, Mike, that you probably reference to, the experienced guys that have done it over and over again. And it'll be very difficult, I would say, both to find them and to vet them your first time around. So it takes a lot of time and effort to understand how things work and understand what works for you, honestly. So again, this is a long way around of saying, just get started with an amount that you're, say, comfortable, even if you lost it all, but use it as your education capital.
Cole, absolutely love that response. Yeah, it's fantastic. I love how you even talk about how new investors should vet anybody that they're investing with. I think that's super important. This is something I talk to people about all the time that are just getting into multifamily, and they'll come to me and they'll say, "Hey, Mike, how do I know if this is a good company to invest with?" And I tell them, like, "Hey, look, don't just trust the slides, but do your own market research on the asset that they're purchasing. And if it fits your buy box, then go with them, right? If the numbers they're showing you are accurate, then, you vet it yourself as well. But I think that's super important that you vet whatever partners you go into a deal with. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, Cole.
Yes, sir.
Okay, final question of the final round.
Yes.
And Cole, that is, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast, or both?
Sure. I do the Amazon audiobooks. I will tell you that. A lot of, I think, investing. I'm a big fan of learning about the history of the world and understanding how cycles work, market cycles, and it repeating itself on a lot of things. I like the theme. It's history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. One of my favorite books I always say is The Ascent of Money. It's a British author, and it basically talks about the history of the world relating from the times of stock markets opening up in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, all the way to modern days with crashes and whatnot. And it's driven by human behavior, right? So I think understanding how markets have behaved over time, a lot of it's driven by humans. Human emotion drives a lot of this. Wars can be driven by capital, the movements of capital. I think it's important to understand, rationalize how things work in the world, and don't always go into today thinking like this is the first time the world's ever experienced this macroeconomic issue. It's not. Problems are manageable and they're forecastable, and not everything is always a disaster that can never be solved.
I like that. That's a great recommendation. I had to write that one down because it's if you look at it from the beginning, yes, things moved a little bit slower back then because you didn't have instant notifications on certain things. Like nowadays, a billionaire can tweet something and it can affect the entire market.
That's right.
That's just the reality we live in. And that's why everyone out there that's investing needs to just pay attention to what's going on to the world around them, not just, the market itself, but see everything else that can affect the market. So yeah, that's right. That's going to be a great book recommendation. So I appreciate that. Now, Cole, that is it for the final round. I do have another question for you. And this is probably the most important question I'm going to ask you today, because people are listening and saying, wow, this company that he's put together, Legacy Group, and what they're doing in Latin America, just every little thing about it, I want to know more about. And I want to know more about Cole. And we'd like to be able to provide that to our listeners. So if you could, can you share where people can find more information about you? You have a website or social media, anything like that people could follow and check out?
Sure, absolutely. I guess our social media outlet that we're most active on would be LinkedIn. You can look for us at Legacy Group at LinkedIn. We'll be the only one operating out of Medellin, Colombia. And then the other is our website, which is www.legacy-group.co. And you can see all of our active investment offerings, what we do, who the team are, and basically everything that's going on. So I'd love to have any of your listeners follow us and hopefully think that what we're doing is pretty cool.
All right, Cole, fantastic. I'll make sure we have those links in the show notes to make it easy for everybody to find you. So to my listeners, you can copy and paste or click away. Just don't do it if you're driving. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay. And Cole, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Not too many. I had a great time on the show, Mike. I think my big takeaways are for investors: get started, get out there and learn as much as you can.
Absolutely love it. Again, Cole, thank you so much for joining me today. This was fantastic. I learned a lot about you. I learned a lot about your company and what you're doing, and how the name Green really does mean a lot to you. And it means a lot that, that you actually take action. You put your money where your mouth is, right? And not only that, I also want to bring up the fact that one of the things you talked about too is you and your partner investing your own capital into these bigger deals that you're doing. But that just shows that you have skin in the game. Like when we were talking about vetting potential partners or companies you want to go with, you want to look for people like Cole that are taking their own capital and putting their own skin in the game. That's one of the first things I look at when I'm going to invest with somebody. Cole, again, thank you so much, man. This was fantastic. Now, I also want to thank my listeners for joining me and our special guest, Cole Shephard, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Cole. Aloha from Hawaii and Colombia, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.